I think we'll start with the main event, Alex Pereira versus Jamahal Hill. I've just been rewatching Jamahal Hill's fights. He feels like he's been around forever. He feels like he's been a fixture of these UFC fight nights, but he's only had like 5 or 6 fights in the UFC. 7, sorry. And a few of them have been real quick finishes, like the Jimmy Crute one, under a minute. Johnny Walker under 3 minutes. But the curious thing about this fight is that Alex Pereira has fought no good grapplers or wrestlers in his UFC run, which has been a very deliberate effort by the management. Had he come along at a different time when he wasn't particularly necessary or interesting to the UFC, I think he could have been fed to the wolves. And I say that as a huge fan of Alex Pereira. And then on the other side of it, Jamahal Hill has fought one good fighter ever. Well, maybe 2, and both of them were so washed it was unbelievable. He fought Thiago Santos deep into Thiago Santos's just gun-shy decline. And then he took the title, quote-unquote title, because they'd already put it on Ankalaev versus Jan Blachowicz, and they didn't like the draw, so they just said, fuck it, neither of you's having the belt. We're putting it on this one next week between Jamahal Hill and Glover Teixeira. So Teixeira wasn't the champion, but he'd only recently not been the champion. And, he was like 43 years old, but it was still Jamahal Hill's best opponent, and he did put on a pretty impressive showing. Now, you got an extra layer to this because Glover Teixeira is Bezzy mates with Alex Pereira. He's the guy who basically trained him to adapt to MMA. They have a very sweet relationship, which you can see all over Instagram. So there's a bit of a grudge match there. And any fight that Jamahal Hill's in is a grudge match for him because he's just angry at everyone all the time. Always going on about like sportsmanship and being humble and stuff. But the moment that anyone says anything like, I'm pleased that I won the light heavyweight championship or whatever, he's like, no, you didn't. It's not vacant, blah, blah. And you're like, you vacated it, mate. Calm down. Don't punch your brother again. So very weird dude. But this is a peculiar matchup because Jamahal Hill is predominantly a striker, and there's things about his striking that I like, and there's things about his striking that you go, ooh, how did you get that far doing that? There were lots of clips going up this week of his footwork, just clips of his legs moving around, and they're all over the fucking place. But he's got he's a tall guy with a long reach. He had like a scholarship in basketball that he passed up on, not to any top school or anything like that, but I think he's 6'4", and he's got a 79-inch reach, and it turns out that so is Alex Pereira in both those regards. But that's going to be interesting because I feel like in some of these fights, his height and reach have insulated him from shots, counters that he should have eaten or could have eaten. But the things I do like, he uses his jab and he hammers the body. And he's a light heavyweight who can kick. Doesn't even have the nicest kicks in the division. He's not like a Krylov or someone like that, but he kicks when's appropriate and he lands his kicks, whereas Krylov doesn't. So it's very pleasing to watch him use them. He's got a good front kick when he's open stance with his rear leg. He's got a good round kick to the body with his rear leg. He's got a good... In fact, in the Glover Teixeira fight, he's doing his approximation of the Alex Pereira calf kick. When he switches to orthodox, he throws his right leg to the calf upwards so that he's connecting with the inside of the shin. So he's got the body kicks out in the open from long range. When the opponent throws kicks, he comes back in with counter punches to the body, often 2 or 3, which is another great way to get to the body. And then when he punches and the opponent crowds him or covers up, he grabs the head and he knees the body. So he's got these 3 brilliant ways of getting to the body, and they add up really quickly. Does loads of weird shit, leading with uppercuts and stuff and getting hammered with counters, leans back at the waist a lot, throws his head forward when he punches. His legs are often all over the place. He gets kicked in the legs a lot when he's out of position, or just because he's spreading his legs so wide to leap in. So those are all interesting things when he's fighting a great low kicker and counterpuncher. But you don't have to be the cleanest technician in the world to be able to trouble Alex Pereira. And indeed, his weirdness and herky-jerkiness might help him out here. Additionally, we got a 5-round fight, and historically in Alex Pereira's longer kickboxing matches, he tended to slow down towards the end. He got into the 5th round, the first fight against Adesanya in the UFC, and he actually looked pretty fresh and obviously scored the knockout in that round, or the TKO. I think there's an element of the Jiri thing here too, where Jamahal Hill has done great as a striker in MMA, and he's dealt with, the Glover Teixeira trying to take him down. He hasn't had to deal with like Jan Blachowicz or whatever, but he's been decent as a striker dealing with grapplers and a striker in MMA, and we would consider him an all-right rounded guy. But then when he has to call on his roundedness against a super specialist like Alex Pereira, it might not be there. Like, Jiri was faking takedowns and attempting takedowns, but for the most part, he was either failing on bad takedown attempts or being forced to strike with Pereira, where he just wasn't as clean. In terms of game plans, I mean, Alex Pereira is going to continue looking for the legs, particularly against an opponent like this who fights in a long, wide stance and has his legs flopping all over the place as he reaches out to jab at people. The other end of it is that I'd like to see how Jamahal Hill's jab works against Alex Pereira. Hasn't had to deal with an awful lot of good, educated jabs. I think the double jab, just pumping the double jab to back Pereira up. If you watched his fight with Jiri, he was giving tons of ground in that fight, and it kind of disappointed me that Jiri wasn't taking advantage of the fight being along the fence more. He had a couple of moments where he swarmed in or got the body lock or stuff along the fence. I think he got a takedown off the fence at one point, didn't he? And he had one little flurry where he chinned Pereira along the fence. And ultimately, he got knocked out chasing Pereira to the fence. But he had started a bit late on that. His legs were already giving out from being calf kicked. But, the cagecraft is not... Well, this is the thing, because Pereira likes to use the fence to hold himself up as well, but he does back himself straight towards the fence. It's just that, the cage is pretty big at these pay-per-view events, and that does annoy me that they use a different size cage for this and the Apex, but the cage is pretty big, even with men of his size in it. So you've got some work to do getting him across the cage back to the fence. But I think that's a good place to start working. If you watched Hill versus Ovinson Prue, obviously Ovinson Prue nowhere near the striker that Pereira was, but Hill's best work came as he backed Ovinson Prue onto the fence, and where he'd been quite tentative out in the open, he really opened up along the fence and started swinging and hitting the body with knees. Always got to be careful when you open up on Alex Pereira, because obviously that left hand is the death touch. But I think the longer, when I say longer, long clinches like collar ties and things could play to Jamahal Hill's advantage. He does a good job of pumping hands and then grabbing the head and just kneeing the body, which is an age-old tactic in MMA, but I would love to see him use that against Pereira along the fence. Presumably not worried about Alex Pereira taking him down. He got up from underneath Glover Teixeira, who does have deathly top control. So throw tons of kicks, throw kicks to wind him, throw kicks to get kicks back, and time your counters. If you're dealing with if you're dealing with someone who you're worried about kicking you, and you've been training your counters for their kicks, and you're worried about when you're going to time those counters, because you can have the beautiful counters, but if you're not reading the kick, you've got problems. But if you throw kicks, you can get the kicks back, and you start to make a window where that kick is almost definitely going to come. And while Hill likes to switch hit throughout his fights, I think staying southpaw probably serves him best here, because that protects him somewhat from that lead hook. And Pereira's overhand and right straight are also dangerous, but they're just not going to blindside you in the same way that left hook, when you're orthodox, is going to come in and there's no shoulder there. There's nothing to protect you except your hand and your reactions, as we always say.